Hey guys, nice to see you again. So here's our first actual official lecture. This is stuff that's actually, part of class. As I said, I consider the sort of the sig fig stuff preliminary, and it was meant to be a background unit for people who didn't have confidence with sig figs. So there was that. Now we're going to talk about matter and units of measure. Now, if you watched the sig figs, you're going to see a lot of stuff again. And I understand that if you felt you needed to watch the sig figs, you could probably stand to see it again. So that's my logic for doing that. But this is our intro to this particular section. Really, we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about how we classify matter and a bunch of the terminology that we use to do that. So there's a bunch of terms that we're going to define. You will be responsible for understanding those terms. Now, am I going to ask you to define something? No, not really, but I might ask you, which of the following goes with this? Like, which is, would it apply to? Does this define it? That kind of stuff. There may be multiple guesses for stuff like that. And I will also expect that you know what those terms mean so that when I use them, you will know what I'm talking about. Okay, the vocabulary is a really important part of what we're doing here. What you'll find in chemistry is that we start with, it's kind of like learning a foreign language. So you learn a foreign language, right? And when you learn that foreign language, you have to learn the vocabulary of that language, and then how that vocabulary goes together to create sentences. And then you start to have conversations, and then you can, that's applying what you've learned to a new situation. Chemistry is really no different from that. We have the terminology that goes with how do we work with chemicals. So all the words that we need to understand to do that. Then we talk about the theory of how all of these things come together. So we're making sure that we're defining those terms and talking about how those terms work together and apply and what we can do with that. And then our highest level of understanding, we go into talking about how do we then use that information to solve problems, answer questions, do that. So there's some upper level of analytics that goes with that. So we're trying to get you to do something different with the information that you've gained. So that's, the highest part of the Bloom's taxonomy, if you know what I'm talking about, where we talk about the application and the creation of new things. And I'm trying to look at all of those levels to make sure to see where you are in your understanding of this material. So here we go. Got to start with the vocabulary. If we don't have the vocabulary, it makes it hard to have the sentences. If we don't have the sentences, it's very difficult to have the conversation. So let's go there. So that's our intro for this part. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and end this particular recording, and then we'll get into the meat of this particular section. All right, see you soon.